The title of this lab is the densities of hot water versus cold water and fresh water versus salt water. The materials that we're going to be using in the lab include 4 Erlenmeyer flasks, some food coloring, and cold and warm water for the first part, hot water versus cold water. So, the first step that we're going to do is put 2 drops of red food coloring in the hot water Erlenmeyer flasks. And then we'll put 2 drops of blue food coloring in the cold water flasks. After you put the food coloring in there, you can then pour the warm water in the flask with red food coloring and the cold water in the flask with blue food coloring. So I'm going to do that right now. Make sure and fill them to the top and overflow if possible. Once we have the flasks filled, then we'll carry out 2 different experiments. We'll start out by putting the cold water on top of the warm water. And so the cold water Erlenmeyer flasks will be covered with an index card, and I'll flip it over and put it on top of the warm water. This may get messy, so it would be good to use the help of your lab partner do this part of the procedure. What you can do then is pull the index card out from between the flasks. If you can look closely, you should see some mixing happening in between the red and blue food colorings. You can see after a short period of time, the cold water with blue food coloring has fallen to the bottom, and the warm water with red food coloring has moved to the top, but you can't see red anymore. It's all just moderately purple. So what I'm going to do now is do the other part of the procedure where I put the warm water on top of the flask with cold water. You can see there's minimal mixing that happens when the warm water is on top and the cold water is on bottom. This should tell you something about the density of each liquid. Right? For the second part of the lab, we'll be testing the densities of salt water and fresh water using the same procedure. So, first we need to put different colored drops of food coloring in each flask. So, For the saltwater flask, we'll put in yellow food coloring. I'll put in 2 drops of each. And for the freshwater flask, I'll put in 2 drops of orange food coloring in each flask. Now that we have the drops of food coloring in each flask, what I want to do is repeat the procedure for the first part and fill the flask to overflow so that there's minimal air at the top when they're flipped over. So first I'll fill up the saltwater flasks. One note about this salt water is that it is 35 parts per thousand. That's the same salinity as the ocean, just so that we want to compare ocean water to fresh water. So now with the fresh water, I'll do the same and fill them up until they overflow just a little bit. Alright, now for the first part of our experiment, I want to put salt water over fresh water. So the saltwater flask, I'll flip it over and put it on top of the freshwater flask. You can see there's a good amount of mixing happening. Alright, while it continues mixing, now what I'm going to try and do is put the fresh water over the salt water. You can see that there's minimal mixing that happens in this combination. That should tell you something about the densities of fresh water versus salt water.